of CROs, but we'll go to non-insurance companies. So one of the things I was, first of all, I'm Brent Martis with Salmon's Financial Group. Currently their chief strategy officer. I was their chief risk officer for 10 plus years. And one of the things that I always enjoyed being able to do was to sit with CROs that were not in the insurance space. Risk is risk. We all manage risk, whether we're in the risk profession or not. We manage risk on a daily basis, and so it's interesting to see how others in other industries approach risks that are very similar to what we have, but maybe the impacts are quite a bit different. So looking forward today to kind of going through and hearing maybe a little bit different spin on how others outside the insurance space are managing risks today. Um, I've tried this joke for years, but my audience tends to be college students, and they never really understood it. So I'm going to try it here. There's a great risk philosopher out there, gentleman by the name of Donald Rumsfeld. Don't know how many people know that name, but he always said there were three types of risks: known, 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 unknown, unknown, unknown. So the known risks, the things we know. The known unknown, the things we know we don't know, and the unknown, the things we don't know that we don't know. So that's the life of a risk professional is trying to handle those three types of risks. And so we'll work through some of those today. So with me today, I have two very good panelists here, both local to the Des Moines area. On my left here is Maria Matamoros. She's the Vice President and Risk Manager for White's Construction. She is based out of Des Moines, but White's has a much broader footprint than the Des Moines area. And next to her is Charlie Campbell. Charlie is Chief Legal and Risk Officer for Kraus Group. Again, locally, you'll know a lot of what Charlie and his companies work on, but again, both organizations with a much wider breadth than what I imagined when I first started this process. So I am going to let both of them kind of explain a little bit about who they are, what risk management in their industries looks like, and a little bit more about their companies, so you can get a better feel for the types of risks maybe that impact them on a day-to-day basis. So Maria, I will have you go first.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm Maria Matamoros. I work for the White's Company. We are headquartered here in Des Moines, founded in 1855. So we were purchased in 2012 by a global construction and engineering company, Erascom PLC. So we have footprint from the parent company worldwide. U.S. operations is our stronghold. We have offices across the U.S. And my career I didn't study for risk management. I landed in it. From my generation, a lot of us did. So I started. My career was in business, and I got married into a construction family, architects, civil engineers in Ecuador, South America. And when I got into it, I just fell in love with the construction. It's like having a new job every time you walk into a new project. But there are new risks in every job that you walk into every single time. So that's the fascinating part of my job. So as a risk manager in an industry specific area, it's been fascinating. And I started with the White's Company in Florida in their office 23 years ago, and in operations as project management. And then 12 years ago, I was challenged with coming into risk management, started from scratch and came into Des Moines. I know I moved from Florida to Des Moines, and that's always the question I get, why? But it's been fascinating. We are all here and happy in the community. So that's my story.
Charlie?
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Charlie Campbell. I'm General Counsel or Chief Legal and Risk Officer for Kraus Group. Most of you probably know our largest subsidiary business, Come and Go, but we have 10 other operating businesses. And so my day-to-day challenges are about aligning our leaders in our businesses on what our risk tolerance and risk appetite is, as well as identification and prioritization of all those risks coming up through those 11 businesses. I also did not come into risk by training, other than my training as a lawyer about a block from here. but I was volunteered to do risk management for our organization in the Army fashion. Um, our CEO said, Charlie, you're going to be in charge of risk from now on. So here I am. Been doing it for about 10 or 12 years now, and been a great way for me to develop and think about our business in different ways. Also allows me to touch every one of our businesses in ways that I never thought possible. So.
All right, well, we'll start here with kind of a three-part question for you. Can you talk a little bit about how your organizations identify risk, assess risk, and prioritize risk? So a little bit about that process. So Charlie, maybe I'll have you go first.
Sure. For us, we take on a regular risk assessment process where we sit down with our leaders and talk about all of the risks that exist in the business. And for us, because of the 11 operating businesses, they end up being operational risks that exist in each one of those businesses that bubble up through and become large enough. And we try to do some kind of a maybe qualitative, quantitative scoring of our risks and put them on a heat map and really try and think about them that way and the way that they affect our businesses. We also try to pay attention to risk velocity a lot, how quickly a risk is coming at us. And that's always going to be generally going to be a qualitative assessment, but it's important to us to know as a privately held organization, we can take risk on kind of at our leisure. We're not bound by the market or bound by regulatory issues as much as some other businesses. So as we choose to take risk on, we can do so so long as we know when those risks could materialize. And so we spend a lot of time talking about those issues.
Maria?
So our enterprise risk management process really, it's flowing across at all levels of the company, but also through all the areas and functions and business units that we have. So at a strategic, we start with our strategic planning, our strategic objectives. And we have, I think Lori mentioned we have what we call an ERM advisory team made up of key leaders of our company. And that team, we started this back in 2019. We started with an identification of risks, and that was a major effort that went in because it was the first time we were really intentionally doing it from a strategic perspective. Went through all the business units, met with main leaders throughout the company to identify those risks. And until we developed the process, put together a risk appetite statement. And then from there on, we have that team that identifies, meets quarterly. But what are those risks that could impact our strategic plan, both long-term plans and short-term plans? Because we're a construction company and everywhere we look, there are risks. So you can really get lost in the weeds if you start trying to identify every single risk you can. We want to really capture the big ones that could impact those objectives. And then we've implemented that same process at the business management level. So every local office has a risk management committee, and they have their own strategies and plans and objectives that are aligned with the strategic ones, but they're particular to that office. So they're going through this process as well, and they feed up those, not only the risks, but also the mitigation plans they have. And then at the project levels, also risk registers and identifying risks at that level. We also have that same team we put together when we are going to go into a new venture, whether that is going into a new country to work or a new partner that we're looking into. So there's a very detailed risk assessment that is done at that level.
Thank you. Again, a theme from the first session that we're going to hit on here, but my guess is we'll see a slightly different viewpoint. Risks and opportunities that have developed over the last 3 years during the pandemic. I told them both before we started, I think we're going to hit a lot of the same risks that first group talked about, but I think the impacts and maybe how you go about mitigating those risks are going to be quite different with the two of you. So the first one I'm going to hit is supply chain risk. As we talked on the phone last week, supply chain is something from an insurance company perspective is somewhat of an indirect risk. But for both of their organizations, it's probably a pretty direct hit. And so would be curious maybe how supply chain risks have impacted your organizations and how you've tried to manage that risk over the last couple of years. So Maria, maybe I'll start with you.
Okay, so definitely, as a general contractor, we're kind of in the middle. We're in the middle between our clients, who we sign a contract for a project and we lock in a price, and our subcontractors. Our company probably subcontracts about 85% of the work that's done on a project. So we as general contractors can be stuck right in the middle if we're not careful with our supply chain risks. And one of the things that we did during the when we saw this coming, we knew COVID was just the first signs of it. We have a supply chain department or segment that actually handles some of the procurement for our projects. Well, that entity, together with risk management and the executive team, we actually put together guidelines for our teams on how we were going to manage the risks, not only with our clients. So with the clients, how are we having these conversations so they understand the risks of when they're releasing us to start a project? Early release of funds so we can lock in pricing. Same thing with our subcontractors, understanding how they are purchasing. Some of our subcontractors are very sophisticated, others are not so much. So that education and communication with all parties, this has to be a collaborative thing that we are managing together. It can't be a hard hand down and just let the risk go down to the weakest link, you know. So our subcontractors are our weakest link, and it has to be a team effort. So some of those things that we put into place were policies, procedures, guidelines, contracting efforts, and collaboration, communication with the project team.
Charlie?
Yeah, supply chain risk is a huge issue for us, and we get it on both sides as well. We get it as a consumer. We build about 20 stores a year, and if we can't get equipment for our stores, for example, right now we're having trouble getting air conditioner units that sit on top of our stores, and so we can't open those new stores without air conditioner units. Yeah, and that's been a problem that we've had to navigate through COVID, and all of a sudden that air conditioners are not available. And how do you manage that? And so we try to do as much forward buying as we can. We're, like I said, we're a privately held company, so we're able to do those kinds of things and able to make smart decisions that others may not be able to do. We also have some buying power in what we do. So when you're building 20, 30, 40 convenience stores in a year, you can do forward buys on air conditioning units and park them in a warehouse and have them ready to go. Where it really hits us is in the consumer side, where we've got products that just don't show up on shelves because our distributor can't get it, or we can't pull fuel from a terminal. That's always been a problem and a risk that we've managed for many, many years on the fuel side. And so we have policies around buying fuel upstream. We actually own fuel in the pipeline. And we control our supply chain risk by doing that. Another thing that companies of less scale or maybe with less foresight are able to do that we're able to handle because we see those risks coming. And the fuel supply is something that our industry has dealt with for many, many years. But it's become a little bit more present today when you see gas prices going up. And gas prices going up is not just a consumer risk. That's something that we face. It pinches our margins. We really struggle in an escalating price environment. So it's really important that we control that supply so that we don't have that.
All right. Another topic that was talked about in the first group as well, the labor market. And for those of us in the insurance space, again, a lot of it is, what does your hybrid model look like? Do you have people in the office? Are they working from home? Do you care where they work anymore? Both of your industries, you really don't have that option. I can't build a building from my basement. I can't run a convenience store, from Florida, a convenience store in Des Moines from Florida. So can you talk a little bit about some of those challenges that have come up during the pandemic related to the labor market? So Charlie, maybe I'll have you start.
The labor market's been a huge challenge for us. As you might guess, we probably sit at the bottom of the labor market from just a pure wage standpoint, and finding associates for us that want to work in that environment, and it has been a challenge. I went into a store this morning and there was one person on duty, and she was there by herself, manning our kitchen and the register, and that's really tough. I felt really badly for her as she was running around the store trying to get things done. But that's something that's been more of an issue for us today than it's ever been. The convenience store industry tends to be a high turnover industry, but today it's even worse. And so we really try to focus on being a great employer and offering things that other companies and other stores don't, like fixed scheduling and different benefits. People that work for us can get a free meal while they're on duty, and so we offer those kinds of things as a risk, almost as a risk of a risk mitigation effort to keep people working for us. We don't have a problem attracting people. We have a problem keeping people employed because they'll just hop across the street for a $100 signing bonus or a quarter an hour, and we just don't want people doing that. We'd love for people to work for us for as long as they possibly want to. But that's just not the world we're in. And finding those people is getting more and more difficult.
Maria?
Well, very similar to you, Charlie. Construction industry, we're suffering the same labor market issues. And again, our focus is trying to become an employer where people want to work and want to stay. From a long-term risk management perspective, we started back since 2019 because we do need the talent, building buildings, you need talent to do that, to manage that. So we wanted to make sure that we had succession plans throughout all of our company on key positions. If you think about it, even our senior level superintendents, they're aging, and the young generations are not just wanting to walk in and go into superintending. So how do you make that an attractive industry for people coming out of college to want to learn in the field? So obviously there are things like technology and innovative ideas that's going on in the industry that are attracting the talent for field. A lot of them want to go into management. So from long term, making sure we have a plan to replace not only our folks that are retiring, anyone that could just leave the company for any reason that has a key position, has a succession plan with them. The other thing is becoming an employer of choice. So it was brought up earlier, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Construction industry has been dominated by men for many, many years. I walked into it when I was in operations 23 years ago. I was the only project management in my manager in the office. And most of the time I was the only woman in the field when I had to go to meetings with owners and things like that. That has changed. It's wonderful to see my colleagues now walk onto projects and there is, women on the project sites now. Not the same percentages, but there are. So this week, for example, the construction industry now is intentionally looking at this. This week was the Construction Inclusion Week, and all contractors, major contractors, were involved in this effort. And every day we had meetings, every job site, every office. We all had meetings and had down-to-earth personal discussions. What does this mean? What does it mean to be inclusive in our industry? So those are intentional efforts. We've hired consultants to help us walk through this, and those are efforts that we do. We also have the issue that our teams are mobile. A lot of our projects are remote. We do a lot of work around our local offices, but also we get projects, data centers sometimes are out in the middle of nowhere. Senior living facilities will pop up anywhere in the country. So we don't have offices in every single location where projects pop up. So our teams have to mobilize. Trying to hire project managers, superintendents, field supervisors to want to pick up and mobilize, that's a hard one on its own. So we struggle with that as well. And then we have intentionally created in-house recruiting teams. That group has grown significantly over the last couple of years, and hired also third-party consultants and firms that can help us with recruiting.
All right, I'll split these up a little bit. Charlie, you mentioned that one of your businesses, or more than one, is international. Can you talk a little bit about the geopolitical risk that you're facing and how you're trying to manage through some of those risks as well?
Sure. So many of you probably don't know this, but in 2015, 2016, we acquired 2 wineries in Italy. And then in 2020, we bought a soccer team in Italy. And it's exposed us to geopolitical risk that we'd never felt before. There's always geopolitical risk on the fuel side. That's always been it's ever present in the convenience store business. But you feel it differently when you're in a different country and you are, they're directly affected by what's going on in Ukraine, for example. Their energy costs are going up, and they just have a different perspective, being that much closer to the action than we are. And so, for us, it's really been a learning process to understand what geopolitical risk is and how it really affects our businesses over there on a day-to-day basis. One funny story is that the soccer team that we bought had purchased a player from a team in St. Petersburg, Russia, a few years ago. And this last summer, we owed them their final payment on the purchase of that player. Well, as the war in Ukraine was ramping up and all these governments between the EU and the United States were putting sanctions on Russia, our team over there asked, can we actually make that payment? The team itself was owned by Gazprom, which is the Russian energy giant, owned majority by the company or by the country. And then the bank was also a state-owned bank. And so we had questions about, can we pay the ultimate payee, the team, because they're owned by the state-owned company and they're financed by a state-owned company. So how do we actually navigate that as both a entity that's domiciled in the EU and then an entity that is a subsidiary of a U.S. company? And the Department of Treasury watches those things like a hawk, as most of you probably know. So that's just an example of geopolitical risks that we are dealing with today that we never really saw coming as being in the industries that we're in today. And so for us, it's learning, talking to experts over there, and really just experiencing how those things impact our business on a day-to-day basis.
Maria, maybe I'll ask you about inflation. Again, another hot topic from the first session, but how has your organization been trying to manage that risk over the last 6 to 12 months?
Yes, similar to supply chain, we really put together something that impacted supply chain, but also the inflation part. Again, we need to always make sure that the risk of inflation is not impacting us, is not impacting a particular partner that can't control it. So one of the things that we do is we have a team that is tracking material pricing increases and decreases. We saw a few months back how steel and lumber, it just skyrocketed. It was just matters of weeks that it was totally uncontrollable. We could not sign a contract knowing what was going to happen. So contractually, when we work with sophisticated clients, we can mitigate that risk by creating what we call contingencies in the contract or allowances in the contract, where we say, you know what, we don't know, nobody knows. If we want to move forward, the thing we need to do is get started, but let's leave this to the side. And really what's happened in some of our projects is the prices ended up going down by the time we had to purchase it. And so in some cases, we actually, the client could have a savings because we left it as an allowance, so it was what it was. In other cases where we did take the risk, we actually ended up having some savings. In other cases, the risk had to be mitigated with contingencies in the contract. So it's one, how your terms and conditions of your contracts on your projects are negotiated, and those have to be fair for risk allocation. And two, watching our subcontractors, and it's not hand-holding, but it's just working as a team for them to track what's happening down their supply chain. We pre-qualify our subcontractors, not because we're trying to be the hard hand and not let them work on our jobs. We're successful if our subcontractors are successful. If they fail, we fail. So we want to always put a subcontractor on our projects for them to have success. And we need to make sure that they're financially strong. It's a bit of underwriting, which you do in the insurance industry and in the bonding industry. We're doing that process within to make sure we're having those conversations with our subcontractors and make sure they can financially and operationally support. They have the same labor issues we have. That's another issue that's impacting them, not only on the inflation side, salary increases, depending on what part of the country we're working, but also availability. So.
Maria, I'd like to add something based on our experience with your company. Many of you may know we're trying to build a soccer stadium downtown Des Moines for a team. We're working with the Whites Company in doing that. And as we continue to progress our design and get estimates on what that's going to cost, Maria's team at White's has started to project inflationary cost to us and be transparent about that as we go through this process. And that's been very helpful for us as we think about what this project is going to cost and how we're going to meet that challenge. They're looking forward to when we're going to have to make those buys on the big packages of steel and concrete and lumber. And that's been very helpful as we've gone through the process.
I think it's the collaborative, and I think in construction we've all designers, consultants, clients. It's an industry where we've started to embrace collaboration at levels that I haven't seen in the 23 years, and I think it's an amazing effort. And we learn from each other's, even in the peer industry. We have peer groups going on, and I think that's something that we can all learn from.
Last question here, and then we'll see what kind of questions we have in the audience. Risk reporting, risk measurement. Can you talk a little bit about how your organizations try and measure risk and how you report on those risks and maybe who you report the risks to? So, Charlie, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. For us on the measurement side, because we're in such different businesses, it's hard to think about the risks in the same way as they bubble up through those businesses to our parent company. And so what we do, our risk team is a shared service amongst those 11 businesses. And so we operate as kind of a consulting arm of the parent, and we go down into the businesses and help them identify them. And then as we bring them up, we use our senior leadership team to maybe quantify those from a qualitative perspective and score them on severity, frequency, and then, like I talked about, the risk velocity piece. We try and put that together and come out with a score, and then prioritize the work that we're going to do with that. The identification piece, or at least the communication, is done through that collaborative effort as we work as a consultant within each of the businesses and then bring that to our senior team to make those decisions and to make those evaluations.
Maria?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we have an ERM advisory team. At the strategic level, the quantitative evaluation and metrics really happen in regards directly to those strategic goals. So if there are financial goals, those are being tracked from a risk perspective on a quantitative, but mostly on a qualitative basis. I think that's an area that we could probably still work and improve on how do we put metrics specifically to those large global impact items. As we go through the business units, those have the hybrid, and at the project level, we can see more quantitative metrics. Safety, for example, we have dashboards that track all of our OSHA records. How are we doing on a month-to-month? We're tracking EMRs. On the project level, they're tracking on risk registers, impact, frequency, and they can sometimes put numbers to them, sometimes qualitative. What I find in our industry is because we are builders, as we try to develop and implement risk management practices, we have to embed them into our operationals, into how our people are taking on the business. If we try to impose risk management as something separate and isolated from policies and procedures within the business itself, it's not well taken and it's hard to implement. Rather, I had a colleague that always said, in the construction industry, every project manager needs to become a risk manager, and every risk manager needs to become a project manager. In other words, we need to understand the business that we're in and be able to embed ourselves into that business when we work within an industry like we do. So those metrics have to kind of be built into what we are already measuring within our business. Is at least that's been my experience.
All right, we'll see what kind of questions maybe we have out in the audience at this point. Yes. So the question from the audience is around legislative risk or regulatory risk in your industry. So
I'll start with that one. First of all, we do business in, well, we're going to do business in 14 states. Currently, we have come and go stores in 11 states. And so we do employ a government affairs individual lobbyist that works at all levels of government, federal, state, city, county, to influence policies like that. Different than a lot of companies, we tend to play offense on legislation. And so we try to get ahead of those things by identifying how we can win. I'll use an example. So the governor had on her platform over the last couple of years trying to expand the use of biofuels in Iowa. And that was going to be, we've been a leader in biofuels for better part of 40 years. So that's natural for us to get into that space. But the legislation that she originally proposed was not beneficial to us or really our industry. It was more beneficial to the biofuels producers. And so we worked with her office to create legislation that made sense for both the producers and for our industry, and hopefully to get biofuels into the tanks of more vehicles. That's an example where we played a little bit of offense and didn't do something really defensively or didn't have to react defensively in session to try and make something happen. But the idea that we try to play offense on those things is where we probably find the most value in attacking things that we see coming at us. The electric vehicle thing is a current and real risk and something, a strategic challenge that we have in our industry that we talk about every day. So those are, we're influencing policy on how electric chargers get installed and government programs that can incentivize people making those improvements to their stores. So we're at the table as fuel retailers on all of those issues. And that's really our strategy, is really getting at the table and being upfront about the challenges that we have and honest about the challenges that we have with whatever piece of legislation that is coming at us, be it something that affects employees, something that affects fuel, something that affects tax structure. All of that are where we tend to play and try to be a bit more proactive than others.
In the construction industry, for example, we have the Association of General Contractors of America. We belong to that association at different levels. I'm on the risks management committee for them. Our general counsel is on the lawyers committee. Our operations teams is with the operations teams. So uniting ourselves with other contractors, those are ways, and through AGC is probably the biggest influence from a construction industry that we can, as a group, influence legislation from controlling building codes and building licensing efforts and all those. We do that in-house. We have to be licensed in every state we go into work. And some locations even require local licenses. So all that's controlled through risk management, but at legislative, we really group up with others.
I would echo that. The idea of being active in your individual trade associations, whether it's insurance or I was the chair of the Iowa Grocery Industry Association last year, and that industry represents the large grocery stores and the large convenience stores in this state, and there are several of them that are headquartered here. And so we've got a voice that's pretty powerful when we come together to do that, and that's been extraordinarily effective for us. and been a good relationship for us to foster.
Other questions? So the question around how do you build safety culture into your organization? So Maria, maybe you want to take that one first?
Yep. You're absolutely right. In construction, that's our top line. In, and I've been with the company 23 years. I remember back 2005, 2006, we had some really serious safety issues come up. We had deaths in 5, 6 locations that year. That prompted top level. Our CEO took that whole year to go from job to job, to meet with owners, to meet with our teams, to meet with our workers, because changing culture is hard. It takes time. And today, safety, it's been so many years. Safety is top on every meeting agenda, whether we're meeting internally or we're meeting with partners or people that come into our office. All the way from we've hired a wellness coach, because now it's about not only the typical safety issues, falls, electrocution, it is about the wellness. We talked about mental wellness. That's a big issue right now on the construction industry. There is right now statistics regarding suicides in the construction industry. So right now we've even gone further and taking the step of, no, we need to have expertise in wellness and coaching and mental health that can help us within the construction industry. If you walked into our office, we will do a stretch and flex not only on our project sites. You'll see the CEO, CFO, everyone out in the hall, and we do 10 minutes of stretch and flex every single morning. Used to be 8:50, now they changed it to 8:40, but I don't know why. But why? One of our work comp claims years ago, it was a major claim, but it was an office person climbed on a ladder, tried to get something off the supply closet. It was a major claim. And but it's more the caring, it's humanizing safety is the important part. It's not because it's a rule, it's not because we want to mandate it. It's because we care about you and we want you to go home and go back to your families the same way you walked in this morning. So
I'll answer that question in 2 ways, coming from 2 different parts of our business. The first one is we own a bulk petroleum transport company, so a trucking company. They're carrying 8,000-gallon bombs down the road. So if you think about that just for a minute, in that business, safety is one of their values. They talk about it every day, every meeting, similar to the way that Maria did, talks about it. But we've invested in technology that help our drivers get better and keep a safe driving record on the road. Lane departure warnings. There are driver monitor systems that can tell if you're drowsy. There are cameras inside the cab that point both directions at the driver and out front. There are cameras all around the truck themselves. So we've put a bunch of money into keeping drivers and the rest of the traveling public safe in that way. That's a severity issue. And so in a business like that, where the severity is really high, we tackle it with policy procedure, but also with technology. I'll take you to the come and go side where it's more of a frequency issue. And that's about designing processes that are safe to begin with and ensuring that when someone is using, our stores are all designed so that we don't have things stacked above a certain height, or that we have cutting tools that are very short blades. If you actually have to use a knife, you have to wear gloves. And so we put in processes and procedures that hopefully people follow. And that's part of the key, is to get them to actually follow and do it, understand how important their safety is to us as an employer. But it's something that we do. For us, safety tends to be almost like there's a component of safety that's about ESG and about doing the right thing for your people, and keeping people safe is a component of that. And so we talk about it from that context as well.
We had a question here.
Do you know? I'd love to know if you do.
So the question on the labor market is, where did everybody go?
So here's my guess at that. Especially during the COVID period, um, people that could not continue working in whatever industry they were working on, they found a different career path, found a different job, or they found that families could figure it out with one working and the other one not working. In the construction industry, we were fortunate. We could not stop our projects. So, and a lot of contractors, we had major efforts around how can we continue building our projects without putting anyone at risk. And that was major risk management that went on throughout all COVID. And we were fortunate with very few exceptions and very few days lost. We really did not stop our projects except for one that was stopped actually by the client, just from their risk perspective. But from an office, a shared services perspective, we saw a lot of movement. So, I have the same question. Where is everyone? Are they in different industries? I don't know.
I'll offer a couple of different perspectives as well, but this is going to be Charlie on labor markets. So I don't know that many people will attend that lecture. But I think one, as I mentioned earlier, we've experienced a more transient workforce. They're hopping jobs more frequently. They're going across the street for $100 signing bonus, getting that, and then quitting that job and then going across the street again for another $100 signing bonus and just keep this hopping. So I'm not sure they've gone anywhere. They just may be lost in the shuffle as they continue to move back and forth, and how that impacts the labor statistics. I'm not really sure on that. The other piece of it is, and I think through the pandemic, we all probably had some reflections on what's really important. And I think a lot of people kind of may have gotten used to a lower standard of living than they have today and said, I don't want to do that job. It's not worth it for me to do that job and to be miserable, if that's their perspective, for that long a period of time. And so they may be living differently than they were before, and have just decided that that's okay.
Any other questions from the group? All right, I'll tackle a couple of others here. Cyber risk is certainly something that everybody deals with, and again, it's we talked last week. It's not only the risk to your organizations, but how do you protect yourselves against that risk? We heard a little bit of that in the first session as well. That the price of cyber insurance and the qualifications for cyber insurance have certainly changed over the last few years. So maybe talk a little bit about how that risk impacts your organizations and how you're trying to manage that risk as well. So Maria, maybe have you go first.
Okay. So yes, as a construction company, we get impacted. Probably the area that we're seeing the most is on the social engineering side. When you're trying to look for insurance, we kind of have to divvy it up. In our case, we get it. Social engineering, we actually acquire more limits through our crime policy than through our cyber. So we have been fortunate to be able to place cyber insurance for significant limits, but that's not the case I've heard from my peers. I had peers this year that were non-renewed that just couldn't obtain it. And there are just minimum standards now in the insurance industry to be able to get that coverage. I mean, if you don't have multi-factor or authentication, I always get that word wrong. If you don't have processes in place, if you're not starting to put controls in place, going all the way to NIST 800 171 controls, not only is it you can't get insurance, even when you're starting to work in sophisticated and complex projects and with sophisticated clients, it's starting to become a requirement. So we've made an intentional effort. We brought on consultants, and we are continuing to evolve and place controls that mitigate that, all the way from training and communication. One of the things we find is it's not only a technology issue. half of it is a behavior issue. And changing behaviors and culture in a company, when you're used to doing that for 30 years that way, it's hard. Tell construction folks to do that. It is really tough. Tell them that they need 10 different passwords. It just drives people crazy. And so it's been a really a cultural change effort that's taken years, and communication training, our newsletter, we get tested constantly. We get phishing email testing done. You fail, you go through training, a Zoom training, and if you fail 3 times, you're reported up the ladder. So, excuse me? Oh, I thought you had a question. So it's just a ongoing training process on tackling behaviors. Policies and procedures are key. You know, how are we handling payments? That's where we get caught. You know, those emails that come in and tell our accounting folks that the bank wiring information has changed for a subcontractor, go out and pay it. We've seen that. So how do we change and put policies and procedures where we're doing double verification? We won't change bank wiring information for a contractor or a client unless we have a personal conversation. And we even got caught one lately where they had the conversation. So they're tackling now text and phone systems. We had that happen. So it's just keeping up with it. It's tough.
Again, this is an area where we see this on both sides. We're both experiencing cyber attacks constantly. Obviously, we serve 1 million customers a day. And so those 1 million customers come through our doors, and they give us their credit card information, or they're processing their credit cards through our gas pumps or inside the stores. And so people are constantly trying to get into our walls. We are governed by the payment card industry itself. And so we have standards that we have to meet from the payment card industry that says you have to have these certain things in place. Last year, when our cyber insurance renewal came up, the carrier came back and said, well, if you don't have these 10 things done, we're not even going to talk about renewing your coverage. We're just going to cut you. Luckily, we had 9.5 of them done. And the last piece to put in was multi-factor authentication across our entire system. We were in the process of already doing that. We just accelerated it. So we were able to get coverage, but it doubled in price just because of the industry that we're in. So that was a problem. I can get on a rabbit hole in this next part, so you may have to stop me. But on the victim side, people go out on the dark web and they buy credit card information, and they will put them on hotel keys, and they'll come to our stores, and they will drive a big pickup truck with some kind of bladder in the back of it, and they'll fill it with diesel fuel, and they'll just keep filling it with diesel fuel and swiping different cards over and over and over again. And they'll build up this tank of this unsecured tank of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, and then they'll go sell it on the black market. Because we're a payment card industry member, the charges that come back to the people who, all of you have had a fraudulent charge on your credit card, that comes back on the retailer every time. And so we're actually working with Secret Service and the FBI to stop rings of thieves like this. But this is where we get impacted as a consumer or as a victim of cybercrime, and it happens every day under all of our noses. It's a big challenge for us.
Any last minute questions here? All right, I'll bring up one more topic that I think we'll talk about here later today too, is just the impact of ESG. For the insurance industry, it's something that is certainly getting a lot of attention today. I don't think that's going to go away. So can you talk a little bit about how maybe ESG is impacting your industries and how you're going about trying to manage that? Charlie, you want to start?
For us, ESG is a part of who we are as a business. We've been doing environmentally sustainable stores since the early 2000s. Like I said earlier, we've been a leader in biofuels since the 70s. And so on the environmental side, we've been a part of that. We give 10% of our pre-tax profits to charity and have been doing that since our founding in 1959. So it's a part of our DNA. Where we've really expanded our ESG work is in the area of DEI. And that's been important for us. And from my perspective, DEI is not only the right thing to do in treating people like people, but it's good business. We serve and employ people from every walk of life as customers and as employees. And so for us, we want to be an inclusive environment all across the board, whether that's in our corporate headquarters, at our store, in our other businesses. We really want to be an employer of choice and a place where people feel comfortable. And so that's where we've put our shoulder on the DEI. As you know, like I said, it's been a part of who we are. And so the DEI piece of it is just an expansion of our ESG efforts that have been a part of our company since its founding.
Maria, anything to add?
Same thing in the construction. It's been part of our business. I think we're, and it's something that we have been talking about here in the last few months, is actually how do we put a statement that gathers everything we do into a statement like insurance companies are doing now, where you're actually putting it all together in writing and putting expectations and showing how we do business as a construction company. Because from an environmental, just like you all, from an environmental side, I mean, in constructions, we get hit all the time with constructability reviews for environment on the same project we're working together. That's a big issue on that one. So there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to make sure that we are being responsible in the environment. From a construction side, we build projects based on LEED certifications. You could have gold, silver. So we've been in this, but I think one area where we want to go is actually putting it all in writing and showing how in these three categories we're actually performing.
I think there's a piece of being transparent with your stakeholders, whether that's your customers or your owners or whomever, about where you're at on ESG. We've started publishing a corporate social responsibility report every year, and it exposes us in areas where we're not as strong, but it also highlights areas that we are strong, and it allows us to kind of tell our story as to what our evolution is going to be. But that's been a great exercise for us in helping everybody understand who we are as a business.
Thank you. I thought our 55 minutes would go pretty quickly. I think it has. Please join me in thanking both Maria and Charlie for their insights here.
Thank you all. We will take a 5-minute break, but I wanted to update you on a schedule change due to Andy's schedule. He is at the NAIC commissioners meeting now, and they shifted their schedule around. So we've changed our agenda. Coming up next will be our keynote speaker, Gary Zhu, followed by lunch at 11:30. And then after that, we'll have the capital models presentation at 12:30. At 1:30, we will continue with the insurance company ESG as scheduled, and then Andy will fill in the slot at 12:30 to wrap us all up at the end of the day. Thanks. See you in a few minutes.